All right. So last time we ended up fixing most of our, if not all of our issues with the current event sub notification system or just implementation system that we had for our Twitch bot. So now we can actually do things like grab event sub subscriptions, so webhook subscriptions from Twitch, which then gives us semi real-time events for things like follows, subs, raids, cheers, resubs, channel point redemptions, so on and so forth. So now we are finally ready to use this real-time or semi-real-time data to actually do things within our overlay. But before we do that, I actually had to spend around 2-ish hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours, trying to figure out why my overlay on the stream had broken. So, and it turned out that the overlay was no longer working because whenever we were setting up the event sub stuff, we had to make sure everything was in HTTPS, if you'll recall. So remember, whenever we changed this stuff to HTTPS and then created a self-signed certificate and all of that. So whenever we did all that, I didn't realize that the internal browser within OBS will not display a browser source that is HTTPS with a self-signed certificate. And so what I ended up needing to do is create a secondary HTTP server. So just a non-HTTPS server. It's like a regular HTTP server. And then have our WebSocket from Socket.io going through this HTTP server so that we can actually get something that OBS will read. So the way that I did that is I just created another Express instance. So we have our app, which is just the bot itself, and then the HTTPS server, which is what's grabbing the event sub information and then feeding it to the bot. And then I created a secondary Express app that is specifically just for the overlay. And so this is running off of HTTP, which, if you'll recall from the earlier points in this series, this is how we started out with running the bot. We had it on an HTTP server instead of HTTPS. And then what I had to do is have our Socket.io instance going through the overlay server instead of the app server. So, and then once we set that up, I had to come down here to where we set up our routes for the callbacks for the event sub stuff and all that. And so we had to put in the web page routing for the overlay app into the overlay app part of it, and then create a separate route, also a separate server. So the separate server is running on a different port from the main server. So we have an HTTPS server and we have an HTTP server. So the main thing to keep in mind whenever you have to do something like this is you cannot have two servers running on the same port. So the HTTP stuff is running on port 4000 like we had it originally. And the stuff that's working with the overlay is running on port 4001. So port 4000 is on HTTPS with a self-signed certificate, and port 4001 is running a HTTP server, which is just hosting the overlay itself, and perhaps a little bit more stuff later. And so then I created a separate overlay app route for just purely HTTP ://localhost 4001, and that just displays the overlay again. So that's how you're going to get the separation of concerns, if you will. So in order to bypass the fact that OBS will not take in a HTTPS address with a self-signed certificate, you just have to have two Express servers running, one for HTTP and one for HTTPS. So now that that's out the way, we can actually get to the content of this video, which is actually doing something with the real-time events that we're getting from the webhooks from Twitch. So the main way that we're gonna do that is we are going to add in a separate listener on our Socket.io socket that's being pushed to the overlay. And so the main thing that is going to happen here is going to be just pretty simple. So the stuff that's happening on the bot end is going to be pretty simple. So what we're doing is we're just saying socket.on. So we're creating another listener. We're going to call this event webhook, because that's what we're using, webhook event. Better yet, let's call this, just to be plain, Twitch webhook event. So that's going to be the event name that we're listening for. And then we're going to create a function with this, and that function is going to take in a parameter, and we'll just call it webhook event. Then, just like what we're doing here with the goals listener, we're going to do the same thing that we have here. So we're going to say socket.emit, and we're going to emit the Twitch webhook event. So just like up here, we're going to put in the Twitch webhook event, and then pass in the webhook event that we're getting directly from Twitch. So we're just basically forwarding everything that we get to Twitch to our overlay. And so what we're going to do is to actually do this forwarding, we are going to go down to our callback function, and we're going to say, actually, let me just make sure that I'm doing this right. So let's go back to our goals. We're going to go back to our goals command. Here we go. We're going to say io.sockets.emit, and we're just going to copy paste this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to our callback route that we get everything from Twitch. And then before we send out that we have received the content that we've asked for, we will do a separate call. We're going to emit this. We're going to say Twitch webhook event, and then we're going to pass in for what we're passing to the bot. To the overlay, we're going to throw in the event body. So everything that Twitch sent us, we're just going to push it forward into the overlay. And then once we get it to the overlay, we can determine what kind of event that we're getting. And then we can decide what we want to do with that event. I'm just cleaning up my console logs here. So the reason that we're doing it this way and just throwing everything at the overlay and letting the overlay handle it itself is because we need to send the response back to Twitch that we received the data very quickly. Like, we only have a second or two to be able to do this. And so what we need to do is just toss the data wherever we're going to toss it, and then send Twitch a response that we got it. Because otherwise, Twitch is going to assume that we didn't actually get the data, and then they're going to repeat the data a couple of times until they're just like, okay, we're done trying, and then they close our connection. So in order to just keep things snappy, we are just throwing things over to the overlay and letting the overlay handle the logic from there. So what we're going to do is, now that we've tossed things over to the overlay, what we're going to do is we are going to go over to our index.html file, which is what our overlay is actually in. And we are going to create a new div. And of this div, we're going to give it a ID of, let's say, alerts section. Let's call it Twitch alerts section. And we're going to leave this div empty because we are going to make the content for this div within the overlay JavaScript. And that is going to make things quite a bit easier for us. So what we're going to do is we can just collapse this. We don't need this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another listener within the overlay.js, which is what is connected to our HTML page that actually runs the logic. So we are going to create another listener here, and we're going to have the listener event name, yeah, you probably guessed it by now, as a Twitch webhook event. And just like before, in the bot side of things, we're going to create a function, and we're going to have that as the webhook event. So, all right, and it's here that we figure out what kind of alert are we getting, and then what we're going to do with that alert. So the first thing that we're going to need to do once we receive the webhook event is we are going to need to determine what kind of event we actually received. So did we receive a follower alert? Did we receive a sub alert? Did we receive a cheer? Did we receive a raid? And so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is we are going to first worry about doing follower alerts. So if we check the Twitch event sub API, we can see that we have the channel follow subscription type. And if we come down here, we can see what that looks like. So what we're going to do is we are going to say if the webhook event dot subscription, so this is going to be a JSON object. So if the webhook event subscription type is channel follow, so actually I'm going to copy and paste this. So then we're going to do something with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here, and we're going to say if the webhook event dot subscription dot type equals a string of channel dot follow, since we know we got there, then what we're going to do is we are going to create a new element. So we're going to create a few new elements. So what we're going to do is we are going to first grab, if we go back into the API stuff, what we're going to do is we're going to pull in the event itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this let's just call it the event. Or, yeah, follow event. Let's just call it follow event. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the follow event and the name. Okay, so what we're going to do, yeah, so that makes it kind of confusing. So if you're looking at this, my initial thought was to grab this, but that's actually the broadcaster username. What we want is this. And the reason that we want username instead of user login is user login is always going to be lowercase. This is usually what you see in things like IRC or how Twitch reads logins themselves. So whereas this is, actually, do you see it all lowercase in IRC? Oh, not sure. But anyway, the username gives you the actual capitalization of the account that just subscribed. So we're going to grab the username. So actually what we can do is just grab the event.username. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that we have a constant called follower name equals the webhook event dot the user underscore name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do something very similar to what we saw here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a few elements. First, we're going to get our alert box. So what we're going to do is we're going to say our Twitch alert section, which really we can just call it, yeah, let's just call it the same that we have it there. So we're going to create a constant called Twitch, and I realized that you should have this in lowercase first, but it's fine. So Twitch alerts section, did I have that as a singular or plural? So yes, plural. So we're going to say equals document dot get element by ID, and we're going to say the Twitch alerts section. And then we're going to create a few new elements that we're going to stuff into this. Actually, we're just gonna create one new element. So what we're gonna do is we're going to create an alert. Actually, no. All we have to do is we just have to say that we first want to clear out the alert section. So first we want to say the inner HTML of this. We want to clear it out. So we just want to make it into an empty string. And then what we want to do is once it's cleared, we can take that and then say Twitch alert section. It's actually, I'm going to switch this to a lowercase t to make auto completion easier. So just give me a moment. And all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say inner HTML again. And then what we're going to say is we are going to put in a few HTML elements. So we're going to say we're going to create a span with the ID of follow name. So creating the escape character so we can actually have the quote in there in the actual HTML. So what I'm going to do is close this and then close this. All right. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say, actually, will this work if I just put in quotes? No, yeah, it'll work now. Nope, it will not work. Okay, never mind. I had it working before. Ignore me. So the reason that I'm using a backslash and the quotation sign is if you're working within strings, what you can do is either wrap your string in a single quotation, so it's like apostrophes, which actually let's do that instead. Let's wrap it in quotes and then we'll say we have single span. Sorry, I am just messing all this up. So we're just gonna have it as apostrophes instead of quotation marks, so we can actually use quotation marks within our HTML. So because this is a string, so ID, and now we can use quotes and close this. There we go. So like that, and we want this to be an ID of alert name. Actually, no. Let's say alert username. And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself already. So what we want to do is we want to first wrap this in a div. So then we're going to shove this span in the div. You can see how I'm kind of thinking through this real time. So the div is going to have an ID of, let's see, we're just going to call this alert container. We want to keep this as explicit as possible. So this is going to contain the alert itself, and then the content of the alert is going to be within this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to expand this out. Okay. So then what we're going to do here is the username that's going to be within this span is going to be the follower name. Yeah, hold on, let me close this and then put this right here. Okay, and then the follower name. And then we're going to have this as another string space has joined the Silver Fellowship Plus. And there we go. So let's see. Actually, I kind of messed this up a little bit because we were using single quotes instead of double quotes. So we're going to do here, we're going to exchange all these double quotes for single quotes. This is should fix the issue where it wasn't recognizing the follower name before. Okay, and then we can change this to single quotes. That fixes that. I just got to remember that whenever I start off with single like apostrophes instead of double quotes, you have to do that for everything. That was my fault. So now that should be it. and we're done. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna test this just the way it is, because later we're gonna need to test out the fact that we need to have like a queue system that if we get a bunch of follows, a bunch of subs, a bunch of cheers at a given time, that it'll create essentially a list of things that will then play in sequence until everything is done. So, first thing we need to do is we need to work on our CSS so that this thing will work in the way that we intended to. So we have to create a alert container, and then we have to create a, let's see, actually we may not have needed the alert container. We'll try it. I have an idea. We're gonna bypass the alert container for just a moment and try something else. Just for a second, I have an idea. This is how I just kind of do things real time. So I did not pre-plan a lot of this. We're doing it live. So what we're gonna do is we're going to create a new ID. We're gonna call the ID. We're gonna call the Twitch alerts section. And actually, yeah, we still do need the alert container. I was right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have the margin of this be auto, which is going to cause this to stay in the center. Is wherever, however big the person's username is, or what have you, this should keep everything in the center. And then we're just going to create some padding, just to make sure that things don't get, like, just squished up on the bottom, or the top, or wherever, you know, the border that we have this going. So we're gonna give it a border, some padding of around 8 pixels. And then, what we're gonna do, let me pull up my notes, because I did do a bit of the CSS beforehand. So what we're gonna do is we are going to first have our, let's see, making sure I'm in the right place. What we're gonna do is we are going to then create our alerts container. So in our alert container, we are going to have first, we're going to first say that the color, the font color of all this, I did the CSS beforehand. So even though I didn't do a lot of the design of this beforehand, I did do the CSS beforehand. So we're going to define the RGB value of the font color. So we're just going to have this as a super light gray. So not 255, 225, and then 225, and then 225. So this is the red value, this is the green value, this is the blue value. So, but if you just want to use regular colors like red, green, blue, gray, what have you, go for it. But this is just the font size, I mean the font color that I wanted, just messed with it and came up with that myself. So then we want to have the font size. This might be a little bit too big, or might be a little too small, but whenever I tested it in CodePen, this was just right. So we're going to have this as 64 pixels, and we're going to have this position relative. And actually, I should come over here to the alerts section and then make the position absolute. And we want the bottom of this to be at 0. So we want this to be all the way at the bottom. So we want the stuff to come up. So we want the position to be relative. And let's have the top of this be, let's see, I don't know how far down it needs to go. So let's just take a guess. And let's say 72 pixels. It needs to be 72 pixels down. So we need to say negative 72 pixels. So we need it to go down. And now what we want to do is we want to create a animation set for this. And we want it, let's see, we want to call this, actually let's create the animation itself first. So we're going to call this animation I guess the same thing that we call the CSS class or ID itself. So we're going to create some keyframes, we're going to call it alert container. Actually, no, let's just call it alert animation. Okay. And we're going to do a few things here. And this is going to get pretty neat. So what we're going to do is first, we want to define the 0%. So at 0%, we want the top of this to be at the same point that it was at before. So we want it to start at negative 72 pixels. So top is going to be at negative 72 pixels. And that's all we're going to do for that. Then at 25%, what we're going to do is we are going to put the top back to 0. So putting it in the place that it should be. And then we want to have a shadow follow the text as it goes up. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say a text shadow. And the way that this works is it takes in a few parameters. So the first parameter, or argument I should say, is the vertical position of the shadow, the horizontal position of the shadow itself. And then we're going to say the vertical position. So the horizontal, then the vertical. So the vertical, and then the third is how much the shadow is blurred in relation to the text itself. So we want this to be a little blurred, since we kind of want it to be a drop shadow that follows the text as it goes up. And then we want to define the color of the shadow. So in this case, we are just going to go gray. And then at 50%, we're going to do something very similar. So let's see, what's it yelling at me for here? So use of pixel here is redundant. So there we go. So what we're going to do here is we are going to copy this, and then we're going to paste it here. We're going to change the position of the shadow. So we're going to say is we're going to make this go, as soon as the text gets all the way up, we're going to say that it's going to shift the shadow 5 pixels to the left. And then it's going to come meet the letters and just stay where it is for a second. And then we are going to, at 100%, we're going to have the shadow be, this is 5 pixels to the right. And then we're going to just extend the shadow 10 pixels out to the right, and then have the vertical go no further up or down, and then we're done. So what we're going to do later is, this is just showing it just go up and then just stay on the screen. So what we're going to do later is we're going to have it to where the alert box will come up, stay for a few seconds, and then go back down. So, but for now, we're just going to experiment with it just coming up and then just showing itself on the screen. So now that we have our alert animation, we're going to do, actually, we should have our alert animation above this. So let's take this and we'll move it up above our alert section. So do this and do this. All right. So in our alert container, we're going to add in an animation name, and that is going to be our alert animation. And then the animation duration is going to be 4 seconds. And then at the end of the animation, we want this to stay. So we want this to be the animation fill mode. We want this to be forwards. What you'll notice is that we also have, so we had the alert container, and we also had a span in the alert container called the alert username. So we need to define that as well. So in the alert username, so with this, all we really need is to just have a position of relatives, and then we need to create the animation itself. So just like with this, what we're going to do is we are going to create another keyframe animation. So let's say keyframes, and we're going to have this as alert animation name. Clear alert name, well, username animation. So with this, we're going to do something very similar to what we did before. So at 0%, we want our text shadow to be completely black, just non-existent, essentially. So 0, 0, 0 with a color of gray. And then at 25%, what we want is something very similar, except what we're also going to be doing is messing with the font size. So we're going to first ensure that the font size is the regular size that it usually is, so 64 pixels. And we're going to have the color of this text be white. And then we're going to start messing with the text shadow again. So the text shadow will do something very similar to the one above. So we're going to start off with no horizontal and then 10 pixels of vertical, so it follows the text as it goes up, and then 10 pixels of blur, and then the color gray. And then here's where things are going to get crazy. What we're going to do is at 50%, we're first going to increase the font size to 72 pixels. So the text is going to come in, it's going to make the username get big, and then we're going to change the color of the username to cyan. And then we're going to go super crazy. So with the text shadow, what we're going to do is we are going to have 4 shadows spawn in the cardinal directions, so north, south, east, and west. So up, down, left, and right at the same time with different colors. This is going to look cool. So the way that you do that is you do your colors just the way that we were doing it before, and then you just do it multiple times. So what we're doing here is we're going to say we want this shadow to go 20 pixels to the left, 0 pixels down, have a blur of 5 pixels, and then a color of blue, and then comma for the next shadow. Then we want this one to go 20 pixels to the right, 0 pixels up or down, 5 pixels of blur. We want this one to be gold. And then the next one, we want it to have 0 horizontal, 20 pixels down, 5 pixels of blur, and then the color is silver. And then this next one will also be silver, but this one will be 0 pixels horizontal, negative 20 pixels. So this one's going to go up 20 pixels, and then 5 pixels of blur, and then this one will also be silver for obvious reasons. And it's neat how the IDE will actually show you these on the side, the little color swatches on the side. So next, we're going to have the at 100%. So whenever the animation is done, we want the color to go back to white, and then we want the text shadow to just go back to a simple text shadow. And we want the text shadow to have 10 pixels to the right, so we need to move vertically 10 pixels, then none up and down, and then 10 pixels of blur, and then this is gray, and then that's it. So like I said before, this is probably going to change a bit whenever we are messing with whenever we want this to go up and down. But for now, this is what we're going to work with. So then what we want is in our alert username CSS declaration, we just want to have the animation name be our alert username animation. And then, just like before, the animation duration is 4 seconds. And then the fill mode is going to be forward. And then we're good. So, if I did everything correctly, we should, operative word being should, be able to do a test alert and then see how this is going to work. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is test this thing. However, the Twitch CLI has proven a bit useless here, because now that we're going through HTTPS for our callback route, the CLI is giving us trouble because we're using a self-signed certificate, and we don't have a HTTP route to use for the CLI, which we could make one, but that would be rather redundant. So instead of doing that, let's switch this to, instead of saying channel.follow, let's change this to be when a channel point a channel point reward is redeemed. So it does have a similar payload that we can then test against and do that in real time. So now that we have that, we can then start the bot and wait for our subscriptions to go. There we go. We now have our webhook. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to redeem a channel point reward. It's going to redeem my old man rant, because if this doesn't work, you might actually get one. Okay, so redeem. We're waiting for the event on the Twitch side. Okay, and we just got the event, and we didn't. Oh, no wonder. I didn't actually turn on the overlay. So that was my fault. Let's try that again. So we are getting the alert. So let's try it again now that the overlay is actually on. Looks like we only got one event. We only got the one event. Okay, hold on. Okay, so now let's try redeeming it again, now that we've done that. So let me pull this back up. Okay, let's redeem the Valley Girl. Oh, wait. It did work, but it just took a long time for the event to go through. Okay, so it just takes a nice little while for the event to actually go through. So let's turn off the overlay, turn it back on again, and let's redeem a channel point reward again. Let's do Terrible ASMR this time. There we go. So we have now proven that the alerts do work. So that's cool. Also, I think that I need to work on the CSS a bit, but we have proven that the alerts work. So the remainder of this is just going to be working on the CSS itself. Once we fix the CSS, then we can just do the rest of the alert types and then call it a day. So let me end the subscriptions for Event Sub. So, and then close the bot. And then for our last few minutes, we can fix the CSS really quick, because it seems like it's flying down from the top instead of the bottom. So let's see if we can fix that really quick. So in our goals, let's see. No, it's our alert section. No, it's our alert container. We want the bottom. We want to change all the tops to bottom. I think I might have had that backwards. So let's change all the bottoms, so the tops to bottom, whether that be in the CSS declarations themselves or in the animation declarations. So let's change all these to bottoms. So bottom, 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 bottom. Okay. And then let's try the bot again. Wait for our subscriptions to subscribe. There we go. Our webhooks to subscribe. And get another Terrible ASMR. I need to turn on the overlay. Okay. Overlay is loaded. There it is. It loads in from the bottom to the top, and then makes the name go big, and nice and big, and then goes back down and goes the rest of the way. So that is cool. Actually, I think we can do it again and get it to run again. So it should just, once this hook goes through, once it actually happens, it seems like the event subs sometimes take up to like 10 to 20 seconds to go through. Because I just redeemed Valley Girl, and we're still looking at, in the console, the Terrible ASMR. So it does make me wonder, like, the general speed of webhooks here, and how viable it's going to be for certain things. Yeah, we're still waiting on the redemption. That's interesting. So this is why I call event subs semi-real time. Chad, y'all want to take a guess how long this is going to take to go through? Or is it just not? What are we thinking? I'm wondering if this is actually going to go through. How about we redeem another one and then see what happens? Interesting. So the Valley Girl did not trigger, but the old man rant did. Interesting. Is it only going to trigger once per event? Okay, let's do another Valley Girl. So Valley Girl is not doing it. It's just not coming up at all. But then let's do another old man. It didn't trigger. So, interesting. Okay, so let's reject all of them. And, okay, we can see here that it was canceled. And unfulfilled. And it did it again. And then it canceled. So is it just showing them through, like, one at a time? You can only have one unfulfilled at a time. And then it did the Valley Girl again. So it will only take one as long as it's unfulfilled. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Alright, so we have discovered that this works. However, whenever you're dealing with channel points, the Twitch event subsystem will only allow you to get an alert for one event at a time. If you're dealing with channel points, it seems, it will only allow you to get one alert at a time, assuming that the alert itself is unfulfilled. So for those of you that are designing things around this, that might be something to consider. So keep that in mind. And this may require more testing. I may be wrong. But regardless, we have successfully connected our overlay with the Twitch event subsystem. So the next video, well, maybe not the next video. So the next video will either be just going through the remainder of the alert types that we can have and just creating HTML and CSS alerts around that, or we may move on to the next feature, which will probably be something along the lines of either doing a separate system for channel point redemption alerts, or we might do something for stream-wide on-screen metrics, so like tracking follower goals or sub goals, things like that. But regardless, it should be good, it should be interesting. Hopefully it'll be valuable. So thanks for watching. Stick around. Subscribe if you haven't already.